Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Cat Tales, a Warrior Cats Reread podcast. I'm Coffee, your host, and this week we'll be reading chapters 24 through 27 of Rising Storm. Where we last left off, something rather unfortunate happened. There was a forest fire in ThunderClan territory, and unfortunately, along the way, Fireheart had to go back and get a couple of the elders out of camp. Yellowfang went with him. As he was helping with the rescue, Bramblekit, Goldenflower's son, and Tigerclaw's son, who Fireheart has been vaguely racist towards the entire book, gets stuck in a tree that's on fire. So he stops and rescues Bramblekit. Right after that happens, the tree that Bramblekit was in fell, separating Fireheart from Yellowfang. So we're going to pick up right where that left off, with chapter 24. Quote, "Yellowfang!" Fireheart dropped Bramblekit and yowled the medicine cat's name. The blood pounded in his ears as he listened for her reply, but he heard nothing except the dreadful crackling of the flames. Bramblekit crouched at his paws, pressing his small body against Fireheart's legs. Pulsing with fear and frustration, and dimly aware of the pain from his singed flanks, Fireheart grabbed him and raced up the slope back to Patchpelt. The old Tom hadn't moved. Fireheart saw his chest weakly rising and falling, and knew that Patchpelt would not be able to run to safety. He lowered Bramblekit onto the ground. "Follow me!" he yowled before clamping his tired jaws onto Patchpelt's scruff. With a final glance down the burning slope, Fireheart dragged the black and white Tom away from the ravine into the trees. Bramblekit stumbled after them, too shocked to mew, his eyes huge and unfocused. Fireheart wished he were somehow able to carry both of them, but he couldn't leave Patchpelt to die where he lay. Somehow Bramblekit would have to find the strength to survive the terrifying journey on his own paws. Fireheart followed the trail of the other cats blindly, hardly aware of the forest around him, even though he turned back every few moments to check that Bramblekit was still keeping up. His last sight of the ravine filled his mind, a terrifying trough of flame and smoke that engulfed the camp, his home. And of Yellowfang and Halftail, there had been no sign at all. They caught up with the rest of ThunderClan at Sunning Rocks. Fireheart laid Patchpelt gently on the flat surface of the stone. Bramblekit raced straight to Goldenflower, who grasped him by a scruff and gave him a sharp, angry shake, choked by the purring that rose from her chest. Then she dropped him and began washing his smoke-stained fur with furious laps that softened to gentle strokes. The pale ginger queen glanced up at Fireheart, her eyes glistening with a gratitude she could not begin to put into words. Fireheart blinked and looked away. It was beginning to dawn on him that Yellowfang might be lost because he stopped to save Tigerclaw's son. I said this exact thing at the end of last episode. I predicted the future. He shook his head violently. He couldn't think about that. His clan needed him. He gazed around at the horror-struck cats that crouched on the smooth stones. Did they think they were safe here? They should have kept going to the river. Fireheart narrowed his eyes, trying to spot Sandstorm among the huddled shapes, but an infinite weariness made his legs feel heavier than stone, and he couldn't find the strength to get up and look for her. He felt Patchpelt stir beside him. The old Tom lifted his head, gasping for air, before collapsing into a coughing fit that brought Cinderpelt hobbling stiffly out from the throng of cats. Fireheart watched as she pressed her paws heavily on Patchpelt's chest, desperately trying to clear his lungs. Not the cat CPR. Is she just making biscuits on his chest? That's not funny. Patchpelt stopped coughing. He lay still, strangely silent now that he was not even wheezing, and Cinderpelt looked up, her eyes brimming with sorrow. "He's dead," she murmured. Shocked mews rippled back across the rock. Fireheart stared at Cinderpelt in disbelief. How could he have brought Patchpelt this far, only for him to die? And on almost the exact spot where Silverstream had passed into the paws of StarClan. He looked anxiously at Cinderpelt, knowing she must be sharing the same thought. Her eyes were shadowed with grief, and her whiskers quivered as she leaned down to close the old Tom's eyes gently. Fireheart feared the pain would be more than she could bear, but as the other elders padded forward to share tongues with Patchpelt, the gray medicine cat sat up and raised her eyes to Fireheart. "We've lost another cat," she whispered, her voice ringing hollow with disbelief. "But my grief won't help the clan." "You're beginning to sound as strong as Yellowfang," Fireheart told her softly. Cinderpelt opened her eyes wide. "Yellowfang! Where is she?" Fireheart felt a pain in his chest, so sharp it was as if a splinter from the burning tree had lodged in his heart. "I don't know," he admitted. "I lost her in the smoke while she was rescuing Halftail. I was going to go back, but the kit—" His voice trailed away, and he could only stare at the gray medicine cat as her eyes clouded with unimaginable pain. What was happening to their clan? Did StarClan truly want to kill them all? This is like the ancient human belief that weather is controlled by gods. A very interesting parallel. Bramblekit starts coughing, so Cinderpelt starts licking him roughly to ease his lungs, and he calms down. Fireheart turns his attention to the forest, trying to discern where the fire is now. He begins to hear the roaring of flames and sees smoke billowing towards Sunning Rocks. He realizes the fire is headed their way. He shouts orders to the clan to cross the river in order to be truly safe. A loud crack and a bright flash come from overhead. The storm has finally broken. He tells the clan that rain is coming, but they need to move now to outrun the flames. The clan shakes off their shock and all begin to move toward the river. Quote, the cats started to move farther apart, revealing Blue Star sitting motionless halfway up the rock, her face tilted to the stars. A brilliant fork of lightning split the sky, but Blue Star remained still. Was she praying to StarClan? Fireheart wondered in disbelief. Well, that's the most ominous aura farming of this book so far. He urges the clan to hurry as the flames barrel rapidly towards them, fanned by the incoming storm's wind. The cats all scramble, and they make sure to still drag Patchpelt's body along to give him a proper burial later, which is very sweet. Fireheart looks for Sandstorm, but spots Speckletail struggling with her kit, so he runs over and takes the kit from her. The fire is essentially right next to them now, but there's no time to find the stepping stones. They'll have to swim across the river. Quote, as they hurtled across the RiverClan scent line, Fireheart felt the heat of the fire against his flank, and a cruel roaring that was even louder than the thunderpath. He raced forward to lead the way down to the riverbank and skidded to a halt where the forest floor gave way to the pebbly shore. The smooth stones glowed silver as lightning flashed once more, but the thunder that followed was hardly audible above the roaring of the fire. The clan stumbled after Fireheart, their eyes filled with a new terror as they stared at the fast-flowing river. Fireheart felt a spirit quail at the thought of persuading his water-shy clanmates to enter the river. But behind them, the fire tore through the trees in relentless pursuit, and he knew there was no choice. That's the end of chapter 24. Continuing on with chapter 25, quote, Fireheart dropped Speckletail's kit at Whitestorm's paws and turned to face the clan. It's shallow enough to wade most of the way, he yelled. Much shallower than usual. There's a place in the middle where you'll have to swim, but you'll make it. The cats looked at him with horrified eyes. You have to trust me, he urged. Whitestorm met Fireheart's gaze for a long heartbeat, then nodded calmly. He picked up Speckletail's kit and waded into the river until he stood up to his belly in the dark water. Then he turned and flicked his tail for the others to follow. Fireheart felt a familiar scent in his nostrils, and a soft ginger pelt brushed against his shoulder. He looked down into Sandstorm's bright green gaze. You think it's safe? She murmured, pointing with her nose to the fast-flowing river. Yes, I promise, Fireheart replied, wishing with all his heart that they were somewhere else, far from the flame-threatened shore. He blinked slowly at the steadfast warrior beside him, trying to comfort her with his gaze, when really he wanted to bury his muzzle in her fur and hide until this nightmare was over. Sandstorm nodded, as if she could read his mind. Then she raced through the shallows and plunged into the deep central channel just as lightning lit up the rippling water. Fireheart's chest tightened as the she-cat lost her footing on the pebbles and disappeared under the surface. He felt his heart stop beating and his ears roar like thunder as he waited for her to reappear. Then Sandstorm bobbed up, coughing and thrashing with her paws, but swimming steadily toward the far shore. She struggled out on the other side, her coat dark with water and clinging to her body, and called to her clanmates, Just keep your paws moving and you'll be okay. Fireheart's chest ached with pride. He stared at the lithe shape silhouetted against the trees on the other shore, and could hardly stop himself from leaping into the water and swimming to her side. But he had to see the rest of the clan across first, and he forced himself to watch his clanmates as they began to plunge headlong into the river. Still taking the time to yearn, even in a life-or-death situation. He's just like me for real. Dustpelt and Cloudpaw dragged Patchpelt's body to the water's edge. Dustpelt looked down at it, then gazed across the river, his expression bleak at the impossibility of carrying the dead cat to the other side when it would be difficult enough to swim alone. Fireheart padded to the warrior's side. Leave him here, he murmured, even though the prospect of leaving another cat behind tore at his heart. We can come back and bury him when the fire has passed. Dustpelt nodded and waded into the river with Cloudpaw. The apprentice was almost unrecognizable under the smoke stains, and Fireheart touched his nose to the young cat's flank as he passed, hoping Cloudpaw could sense how proud his mentor was of his quiet courage. When Fireheart lifted his head, he saw Small-Ear hesitating at the river's edge. On the far side, Sandstorm was standing belly-deep in water, helping the cats as they struggled to the shore. She called encouragingly to the old gray tom, but Small-Ear backed away as another bolt of lightning lit up the sky. Fireheart dashed toward the trembling elder, grabbed him by the scruff, and plunged into the river. Small-Ear wailed and floundered as Fireheart struggled to keep his head above the surface. The water felt icy after the heat of the flames, and Fireheart found himself gasping for breath, but he plowed on, trying to remember how easily Graystripe had swum this same channel. Suddenly a swift current dragged him and Small-Ear off course. Fireheart flailed with his paws, feeling panic rise in his chest as he saw the gently sloping bank slip past and a steep wall of mud loom in its place. How would he climb out here, especially with Small-Ear? The elderly Tom had stopped struggling now and hung like a dead weight in Fireheart's jaws. Only his rasping breath and Fireheart's ears showed that he was still alive and might yet survive the crossing. Fireheart floundered in the water, trying to fight the current and keep Small-Ear's muzzle above the water. Without warning, a mottled head reached down from the bank and grabbed Small-Ear from him. It was Leopardfur, the RiverClan deputy. Scrabbling in the mud for a paw hold, she dragged Small-Ear out, dropped him on the ground, and reached down again for Fireheart. He felt her teeth sharpen a scruff as she hauled him up the slippery bank. He felt a wave of relief as his paws sank into dry ground. Is that everyone? Leopardfur demanded. Fireheart looked around him. RiverClan cats were weaving among the ThunderClan cats as they crouched, drenched and shocked on the pebbles. Graystripe was one of them. I think so, Fireheart stammered. He could see Bluestar lying under some trailing willow branches. She looked small and frail with her soaked fur flattened against her scrawny flanks. What about that one? Leopard Fur pointed with her nose to the unmoving black and white shape on the far shore. Fireheart turned to look. The ferns on the other side were burning now, sending sparks flying into the river and illuminating the trees with a flickering light. He's dead, Fireheart whispered. Without a word, Leopard Fur slipped into the river and swam to the other side. With her golden fur flickering in the light from the flames, she snatched up Patchpelt's body and paddled strongly back, her front paws churning through the black water. A clap of thunder exploded overhead, making Fireheart flinch, but the RiverClan deputy didn't stop swimming. That's incredibly kind of her. Maybe she does have a soft spot, because she's been kind of a jerk so far. Fireheart! Graystripe raced over to Fireheart and pressed himself against his friend, his flank warm and soft against Fireheart's drenched body. Are you okay? Fireheart nodded, dazed, as Leopard Fur hauled Patchpelt's body onto the shore. She laid it at Fireheart's paws and meowed. Come on, we'll bury him back at camp. The RiverClan camp? Unless you prefer to return to your own, answered Leopard Fur coldly. Okay, never mind. She turned and led the way up the slope, away from the river and the flames. As the ThunderClan cats heaved themselves to their paws and began to follow, heavy drops of rain began to fall through the canopy above. Fireheart twitched his ear. Had the rain come soon enough for the burning forest? More exhausted than he could ever remember being, he watched Graystripe lift Patchpelt's drenched body easily in his strong jaws. The rain began to fall more heavily, pounding the forest as Fireheart fell in behind the other cats, his paws stumbling over the smooth pebbles. Rain continues to fall very steadily as Leopard Fur leads them to the RiverClan camp. It still smells like smoke, but they've left the fire behind. Quote, Crooked Star stood in a clearing in the center of the island, his fur bristling on his shoulders. Fireheart noticed the RiverClan leader glance suspiciously at Graystripe as the ThunderClan cats limped into the camp, but Leopard Fur padded over to the light brown tabby and explained, they were fleeing the fire. Is RiverClan safe? Asked Crooked Star at once. The fire won't cross the river, replied Leopard Fur, especially now that the wind has changed. Fireheart sniffed the air. Leopard Fur was right. The wind had changed. The storm had been carried in on a wind much fresher than any he had smelled for a while. It rippled through his sodden fur, and Fireheart felt his mind begin to clear. Water dripped from his whiskers as he swung his head around to see where Bluestar was. He knew she should greet Crooked Star formally, but she was huddled among her clan, her head low and her eyes half closed. Fireheart felt his belly clench with anxiety. ThunderClan could not afford to let RiverClan know how weak their leader was. He quickly stepped forward in her place. Leopard Fur and her patrol showed great kindness and courage in helping us flee the fire, he meowed to Crooked Star, dipping his head low. Above him, lightning still flickered across the cloudy sky, and thunder rumbled in the distance, rolling away from the forest. Leopard Fur was right to help you. All the clans fear fire, replied the RiverClan leader. Our camp was burned, and our territory is still on fire, Fireheart went on, blinking away the rain that streamed into his eyes. We have nowhere to go. He knew he had no choice but to throw himself on the mercy of the RiverClan leader. Crooked Star narrowed his eyes and paused. Fireheart felt his paws grow hot with frustration. Surely the RiverClan leader didn't think this wretched group of cats posed any threat? Then Crooked Star spoke. You may stay until it is safe for you to return. Relief flowed through Fireheart. Thank you, he meowed, blinking gratefully. Would you like us to bury your elder? Offered Leopard Fur. You are very generous, but Patchpelt should be buried by his own clan, Fireheart answered. It was sad enough that the old warrior would not be laid to rest in his own territory, and Fireheart knew that his denmates would want to send him on his final journey to Starkland. Very well, meowed Leopard Fur. I'll have his body moved outside the camp so that your elders may sit vigil with him in peace. Fireheart nodded his thanks as Leopard Fur went on. I'll ask Mudfur to help your medicine cat. The mottled she-cat scanned the drenched and shivering cats. Her eyes narrowed as her gaze fell on the huddled shape of the ThunderClan leader. Is Bluestar injured? The smoke was very bad, Fireheart replied carefully. She was among the last to leave the camp. Excuse me, I must see to my clan. He stood up and padded over to where Cloudpaw and Small-Ear sat, side by side. Are you fit enough to bury Patchpelt? He asked. I am, meowed Cloudpaw. But I think Small-Ear is... I'm well enough to bury an old denmate, rasped Small-Ear, his voice scratched by smoke. I'll ask Dustpelt to help you, Fireheart told them. A brown Tom was following Cinderpelt among the ThunderClan cats. He carried a bundle of herbs in his mouth, which he placed on the damp ground when Cinderpelt paused beside Willowpelt and her kits. The tiny cats were wailing pitifully, but refused to drink when Willowpelt pressed them to her belly. Fireheart hurried over. Are they okay? Cinderpelt nodded. Mudfur suggested we give them honey to soothe their throats. They'll be fine, but it's done them no good to breathe in the smoke. The brown cat at her side meowed to Willowpelt. Do you think they could manage a little honey? The Grey Queen nodded and watched gratefully as the RiverClan medicine cat held out a wad of moss dripping with sticky golden liquid. She purred as her tiny kits licked at it, first tentatively, then greedily as the soothing sweetness entered their mouths. Fireheart patted away. Cinderpelt had everything under control. He found a sheltered corner at the edge of the clearing and sat down to wash. His singed pelt tasted foul as he brushed his tongue along it. His body ached with tiredness, but he carried on licking. He wanted to wash away all trace of the smoke before he rested. When he had finished, he glanced around the camp. The RiverClan cats had fled the rain into their dens, leaving the ThunderClan cats to huddle in groups at the edge of the clearing beneath the whispering wall of reeds, seeking any protection from the pounding rain. Fireheart was aware of the dark shape of Graystripe moving among his former clanmates, soothing them with his gentle mew. Cinderpelt had finished tending to the cats and was curled up, exhausted, beside Ashpaw. Fireheart could just make out Sandstorm's pale ginger flank, rising and falling steadily next to Longtail's silver tabby back. Bluestar was asleep beside Whitestorm. Fireheart rested his muzzle on his forepaws, listening to the beating of the rain on the muddy clearing. As his eyes closed, the unbearable image of Yellowfang's terrified face burst into his mind. His heart began to pound, but exhaustion took over, and he finally retreated into the refuge of sleep. Whew. That's the end of chapter 25. It's kind of a quick one today. Not much commentary, because there's just a lot going on. Chapter 26, quote, Fireheart felt as if he had slept for only a moment when he woke. A cool breeze was ruffling his fur. The rain had stopped. Above, the sky was filled with billowing white clouds. For a moment, he felt confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then he became aware of the sound of voices meowing nearby and recognized Small Ear's trembling mew. "I told you StarClan would show its anger," rasped the old Tom. "Our home has gone. The forest is no more. Bluestar should have appointed the deputy before Moonhigh," fretted Speckletail. "It's the custom." Fireheart leaped to his paws, his ears burning, but before he could say anything, Cinderpelt's mew rose into the air. "How can you be so ungrateful? Fireheart carried you across the river, Small Ear." "He nearly drowned me," complained Small Ear. "Old people always gotta find something wrong. I swear. Good to know that that's not only in the human world." "You'd be dead if he'd left you behind," spat Cinderpelt. "If Fireheart hadn't smelled the smoke in the first place, we might all be dead. I'm sure Patchpelt, Halftail, and Yellowfang are deeply grateful to him." Fireheart's fur rippled with anger as he heard Darkstripe's sarcastic yowl. "Yellowfang will thank him herself when we find her," hissed Cinderpelt. "Find her?" echoed Darkstripe. "There's no way she'll have escaped that fire. Fireheart should never have allowed her to go back to the camp." Cinderpelt growled deep in her throat. Darkstripe had gone too far. Fireheart patted quickly from the shadows and saw Fernpaw sitting beside Darkstripe, staring up at her mentor with horror in her eyes. Fireheart opened his mouth, but it was Dustpelt who spoke first. "Darkstripe, you should show more respect for your lost clanmates, and," he glanced sympathetically at the frightened Fernpaw, "be more careful with what you say. Our clanmates have suffered enough already." Fireheart was taken aback to hear the young warrior challenge his former mentor. Darkstripe eyed Dustpelt with equal surprise, then narrowed his eyes dangerously. "Dustpelt's right," Fireheart meowed quietly, stepping forward. "We shouldn't be arguing." Darkstripe, Small Ear, and the others whipped around to stare at Fireheart, their ears and tails flicking awkwardly as they realized he had heard their conversation. "Fireheart!" Graystripe's mew interrupted them, and Fireheart saw his friend crossing the clearing, his fur damp from the river. "Have you been on patrol?" Fireheart asked, turning away from the ThunderClan cats and padding over to meet Graystripe. "Yes, and hunting," meowed Graystripe. "We can't all sleep the morning away, you know." He nudged Fireheart on the shoulder and went on. "You must be hungry. Come with me." He led Fireheart toward a pile of fresh kill at the edge of the clearing. "Leopardfur says this is for your clan," Graystripe told him. Fireheart's belly growled with hunger. "Thanks," he meowed. "I'd better let the clan know." He went over to where the ThunderClan cats were gathered. "Graystripe says that pile of food is for us," he announced. "Thanks, StarClan," Goldenflower meowed gratefully. "We don't need other clans to feed us," sneered Darkstripe. "I suppose you can go hunting if you want," Fireheart meowed, narrowing his eyes at the Tappy warrior. "But you'll need to ask Crooked Star's permission first. After all, this is his territory." Darkstripe snorted impatiently and padded toward the fresh kill pile. Fireheart looked at Bluestar. She hadn't reacted to the news of food at all. Whitestorm twitched his ears. "I'll make sure everyone gets a share," he promised, glancing at Bluestar. "Thanks," Fireheart answered. Graystripe padded up and dropped a mouse on the ground at his paws. "Here, you can eat this at the nursery," he meowed. "There are some kits I want you to see." Fireheart picked up the mouse and followed his friend toward a tangle of reeds. As they approached, 2 silver bundles hurtled through a tiny gap in the thickly woven stems and rushed toward Graystripe. They flung themselves at him, and Graystripe rolled over happily, batting with gentle sheathed paws as the kits climbed over him. Fireheart knew at once whose kits they were. Graystripe purred loudly. "How did you know I was coming?" he rumbled. "We smelled you," answered the larger kit. "Very good," Graystripe praised him. As Fireheart finished the last mouthful of mouse, the Grey Warrior sat up and the kits tumbled off him. "Now it's time you met an old friend of mine," he told them. "We trained together." The kits turned their amber eyes on Fireheart, staring up at him in awe. "Is this Fireheart?" mewed the smallest one. Graystripe nodded, and Fireheart felt a glow of pleasure that his friend had spoken about him already to his 2 kits. "That's kinda games." "Come back here, you two!" A tortoiseshell face appeared in the entrance of the nursery. "It's going to rain again." Fireheart saw the eyes of the kits narrow crossly, but they turned and padded obediently toward the den. "They're great," he purred. "Yeah," Graystripe agreed, his eyes soft. "More thanks to Mosspelt than me, I have to say. She's the one who looks after them." Fireheart heard a note of wistfulness in his friend's voice, and wondered just how much Graystripe missed his old home. Neither cat spoke as the Grey Warrior got to his paws and led Fireheart out of the camp. They sat down on a small patch of bare earth among the reeds. A willow tree arched above their heads, its branches quivering in the fresh breeze. Fireheart felt the wind tug at his fur as he stared through the willow curtain toward the distant woods. It looked as if StarClan was going to send more rain to the forest. "Where's Yellowfang?" asked Graystripe. Fresh grief welled up in Fireheart's chest. "Yellowfang came back to the ThunderClan camp with me to look for Patchpelt and Halftail. I lost her in the smoke. A tree fell into the ravine as she was coming out. Was there any way she could have survived the flames?" He couldn't help a flare of hope bursting in his chest, like a trapped pigeon frantically stretching its wings. "I don't suppose you found any scent of her on your patrol?" Graystripe shook his head. "I'm sorry. Do you think the fire's still burning after that storm?" meowed Fireheart. "I'm not sure. We saw a few plumes of smoke while we were out." Fireheart sighed. "Do you think any of the camp will be left?" "You'll find out soon enough," answered Graystripe. He lifted his head and stared through the leaves of the darkening skies. Mosspelt was right. More rain's coming. As he spoke, a large drop landed on the ground beside them. That should put out the last of the flames. Fireheart felt his head spin with grief as more drops spattered through the trees and splashed on the brittle reeds. Before long, the rain was pouring down for the second time, and it seemed that StarClan was weeping for all that had been lost. It's the end of Chapter 26, and now we're gonna get right into Chapter 27. Last one for today. Very sad. Chapter 27, quote, "By late afternoon, the lingering smell of smoke had been replaced by the stench of wet ash, but Fireheart relished its bitter odor. The fire must be out by now," he meowed to Graystripe, who was sheltering beside him beneath a clump of reeds. "We could go back and see if it's safe for the clan to return. And look for Yellowfang and Halftail," Graystripe murmured. Fireheart had known that his old friend would guess why he really wanted to go back to the camp. He blinked at the Grey Warrior, grateful for his understanding. "I'll have to ask Crooked Star if I can come," Graystripe added. The words came as a shock to Fireheart. He had almost forgotten that Graystripe belonged to another clan now. "I'll be back soon," called the Grey Warrior, already bounding away. Fireheart gazed across the clearing to where Bluestar was huddled next to Whitestorm, as if the White Warrior were the only barrier between her troubled mind and the horrific fate that had befallen her clan. Fireheart wondered if he should tell her where he was going. He decided not to. For the moment he would act alone and rely on his clan to shield their leader's weakened state from the curious RiverClan cats. "Fireheart," Cloudpaw was heading toward him. "Do you think the fire is out?" "Graystripe and I are going to check," Fireheart told him. "Can I come?" Fireheart shook his head. He didn't know what they would find at the ThunderClan camp. Uncomfortably, he also realized that he was afraid Cloudpaw would take one look at his ruined forest home and be tempted back into the cozy life of a kitty pet. "I'll do everything you told me," Cloudpaw promised earnestly. "Then stay and help take care of your clan," Fireheart meowed. "Whitestorm needs you here." Cloudpaw hid his disappointment by lowering his head. "Yes, Fireheart," he mewed. "Tell Whitestorm where I'm going," Fireheart added. "I'll be back by moonrise." "Okay." Fireheart watched the White Apprentice pad back toward the other cats, praying that Cloudpaw would follow his orders for once and stay in the RiverClan camp. Graystripe returned with Crooked Star at his side. The pale tabby's amber eyes were narrowed inquiringly. "Graystripe tells me that he wants to travel with you to your camp," he meowed. "Can't you take one of your own warriors?" "We lost 2 clanmates in the fire," Fireheart explained, getting to his paws. "I don't want to find them by myself." The RiverClan leader seemed to understand. "If they have not survived, you'll need the comfort of an old friend," he meowed gently. "Graystripe may go with you." "Thank you, Crooked Star," replied Fireheart, dipping his head. Graystripe leads the way towards the river. As they get to the river, ThunderClan territory is completely charred. The tallest trees still had a few of their leaves, but that was all that remained. The rain came too late to save the forest entirely. Graystripe remarks that staring at the forest across the river was the only comfort that he had. He clearly misses ThunderClan very much. Graystripe leads into the territory, and despite the state of the forest, he seems to relish being back. He sniffs around, and Fireheart is shocked he remembers anything because the forest is that destroyed. They reach the top of the ravine overlooking camp. The canopy is gone, and only the high rock remains unscathed. Fireheart rushes to the gorse tunnel, passing the pile of charred sticks that was the tree he saved Bramblekit from. The gorse tunnel itself is simply a tangle of black stems, and he pushes his way through it into the camp. Quote, as he stared around, his heart pounding, he felt Graystripe nudge him. He followed the Grey Warrior's gaze to where Halftail's scorched body lay at what used to be the entrance to Yellowfang's fern tunnel. The medicine cat must have tried to get the unconscious elder back into the safety of the camp, hoping perhaps that the cracked rock where she had made her den would protect them from the flames. Fireheart started toward the burned shape, but Graystripe meowed, "I'll bury Halftail. You look for Yellowfang." He picked up the limp brown body and started to drag it out of the camp toward the burial place. Fireheart watched him go, his heart frozen with dread. He knew this was why he had come back to the camp, but his legs suddenly felt too weak to move. He forced himself to walk over to the burned stumps that lined the path to Yellowfang's clearing. There was no sheltering green tunnel now. The medicine cat's home was open to the sky, and the only sound was the relentless patter of raindrops on the slimy ground. "Yellowfang!" he called, his voice hoarse as he padded into the clearing. The rock where the medicine cat had made her den was black with soot, but, mingled with the smell of ash, Fireheart detected the familiar scent of the old medicine cat. "Yellowfang?" he called again. A low, rasping mew answered him from inside the rock. She was alive! Shaking with relief, Fireheart squeezed into the shadowy cave. There was barely light enough to see. Fireheart had never been in here before, and he paused for a moment, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the gloom. At the foot of one wall was a row of herbs and berries, stained by smoke but unburned. Then he glimpsed a pair of eyes shining at him from the far end of the narrow cavern. "Yellowfang!" Fireheart rushed to the medicine cat's side. She lay with her legs crumpled beneath her, soot-covered and wheezing, too weak to move. She could barely hold his gaze, and when she spoke, her voice was breathless and feeble. "Fireheart," she croaked. "I'm glad it's you who came. I shouldn't have left you here." Fireheart pressed his muzzle against her matted fur. "I'm so sorry." "Did you save Patchpelt?" Fireheart shook his head hopelessly. He had breathed in too much smoke. "Halftail, too," rasped Yellowfang. Fireheart saw her eyelids quiver and begin to close, and he meowed desperately. "But we saved Goldenflower's kit." "Which one was it?" Yellowfang murmured. "Bramblekit." He watched as Yellowfang closed her eyes briefly, and his blood ran cold. Now Yellowfang knew that he had risked her life to save Tiger Claws. Had StarClan shared something with her? Something she feared enough to wish the kid had not survived? "You're a brave warrior, Fireheart." Yellowfang suddenly opened her eyes wide and stared fiercely at him. "I could not be prouder of you if you were my own son. And StarClan knows how many times I have wished that you were, instead of—" She drew a shallow, grating breath, and Fireheart knew every word stuck thorn-sharp in her throat. "Broken Tail." Fireheart flinched as the old medicine cat revealed her terrible secret, that ShadowClan's brutal leader had been her son, given up at birth because medicine cats were not allowed to have children. Who knew what agonies Yellowfang had endured as she watched her son kill his own father to become leader, and then destroy her clan with his bloodthirsty ambitions? And how could Fireheart tell her that he already knew this? That he had understood that the reason she had wanted to give Broken Tail sanctuary in her adopted clan was because she wanted one last chance to take care of the son she had given up. He leaned forward and licked her ears, hoping to soothe her, but she went on. "I killed him. I poisoned him. I wanted him to die." Her rasping admission collapsed into painful coughing. "Hush, save your strength," Fireheart urged. He knew this, too. He had watched, hidden, as she fed Broken Tail the poisonous berries after the traitorous cat helped Tiger Claw's rogues attack ThunderClan. He had witnessed the cruel warrior die at his mother's paws, and he had heard Yellowfang give away her real relationship with the heartless Tom. "Let me fetch you some water," he offered. But Yellowfang shook her head slowly. "Water's no use to me now," she croaked. "I want to tell you everything before I—" "You're not going to die," Fireheart gasped, feeling a shard of ice pierce his heart. "Tell me what I can do to help you." "Don't waste your time." Yellowfang coughed angrily. "I'm going to die whatever you do, but I'm not afraid. Just listen to me." Fireheart wanted to beg her to be silent, to save her breath so that she could live a few moments longer, but he respected her enough to obey her even now. "I wish you'd been my son, but I could not have worn a cat like you. StarClan gave me Broken Tail to teach me a lesson." "What did you need to learn?" Fireheart protested. "You are as wise as Bluestar herself." "I killed my own son." "He deserved it." "But I was his mother," whispered Yellowfang. "StarClan may judge me how they will. I am ready." Unable to answer, Fireheart dipped his head and began frantically licking her fur, as if his love for this old she-cat were enough to hold her in the forest for a while longer. "Fireheart," Yellowfang murmured. Fireheart paused. "Yes?" "Thank you for bringing me to ThunderClan. Tell Bluestar I've always been grateful for the home she gave me. This is a good place to die. I only regret that I will miss watching you become what StarClan has destined you to be." The old medicine cat's voice trailed away, and her flanks heaved with the effort of sucking air into her smoke-scorched lungs. "Yellowfang," Fireheart pleaded. "Don't die!" Her painful breathing clawed at his heart, and he realized there was nothing he could do. "Don't be afraid of StarClan. They will understand about Broken Tail," he promised wretchedly. "You will be honored by our warrior ancestors for your loyalty to your clanmates and for your endless courage. So many cats owe their lives to you. Cinderpelt would have died after her accident if you had not tended to her. And when there was Greencough, you fought day and night." Fireheart could not stop the words from tumbling out, even though he knew the old medicine cat's breathing had faded into everlasting silence. Yellowfang was dead. And that's the end of chapter 27. And that's the end of today's episode. That's his grandma, bro. Ugh, I forgot how sad that scene was. The way she tells him she wishes he was her son is just heartbreaking. She deserved so much better than what she got. I've read her Super Edition, so I know her backstory. We'll read that book eventually, by the way. We'll read every book eventually. I don't know when, but she lived a good life, and she went out bravely. Rest in peace, Yellowfang. You were a real one. One of the best characters in the first arc. I don't care. Change my mind. You can't. Alright. On that happy note, that's the end of today's episode. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Next time, we'll be finishing up the book Rising Storm. We just have 3 more chapters left, so it'll be pretty short. Honestly, probably half an hour or less. Maybe even 20 minutes. I don't know. So yeah, we're really getting through this arc. So be prepared for that. Thank you so much for joining me, and may StarClan light your path.